Hello and welcome to Mothers Illuminated, where we help light the pathway through motherhood. I'm your host, Michelle McCartney, here at the Co-work of Londonderry. If you're a mom looking for a great place to get some work done away from the house and your crazy kids, definitely look at the Co-work of Londonderry at londonderry.cowork.com. Co-work is spelled C-O-W-E-R-C. They have office space, conference rooms, workshops for business owners, podcast rooms, and lots of great benefits for members. So today I am joined by Melissa Blasek. She's a mom with some small children, and she also recently ran for state representative in Merrimack, New Hampshire, and won. Yes. So that's exciting.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm a representative from Hillsborough 21.
So, obviously, being a state rep, that's all involved in politics, so we're going to talk about politics today. And what kind of got you to the position of actually running for state rep? Especially, I know you also have your own business, you teach music classes, and you have all these children, not a ton of children.
I have one child.
I have one child. So you have your child, at home as well, and your child's quite young, too.
Yeah, she's only 2.
Yeah.
If I can still say, even a year ago, I would not have imagined that I would be doing this now, but COVID kind of changed everything. And I guess all the way back in March, when people first started about shutting down the planet and staying home, I truthfully did imagine that we would still be doing this now. Because once you give the government that type of control, they're not going to willingly give it up.
Yeah.
And I saw what that would mean coming down the line for liberty, because once you give up freedom, you never totally get it back.
Yeah.
And I also could not conceive of how human interference could possibly control a pandemic. So we would just continue kind of doing the same thing that we were doing in a false sense of thinking that it's going to somehow magically cure nature. And I got really panicked in March, seeing all of that. And I got involved I was already involved with Health Freedom, New Hampshire, and they were actually the original ones who were going to do the first protest at the State House. And I really wasn't that involved with them, but I got on the planning call for that protest, and it ended up sort of morphing into Reopen New Hampshire group that had just formed their protest. And I got involved with them because I just kept reading laws, thinking there must be a legal way of getting out of this, and bothering them until they let me, plan with them. And that's sort of how I got involved in this. And ultimately, what Reopen decided was that the only way to create a path forward out of this mess was to, I guess you could say infiltrate the legislator, because the legislator was the key. And so they were looking for people to run for office, and I decided to go for it. So now I'm the executive director of Reopen New Hampshire, and which we've now transitioned to Rebuild New Hampshire, and a state representative. And yes, I own a music school, and I have a 2-year-old. So my life is a little crazy right now.
So if you go back to when you first decided to go for state rep.
Yeah.
Obviously you've never done that before.
Nope.
So there was a huge learning curve when it came to campaigning. Yep. I know. So I ran for state rep as well. Unfortunately, I lost mine, but that's okay. It was in a very difficult area.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that shocked me was how much you have to contribute to campaigning.
Oh, yeah.
And I 100% completely underestimated the amount of time, effort, money, all that kind of resources that it was going to take to properly campaign.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about campaigning while you have a 2-year-old, while you're doing music classes, while you're doing everything you're doing?
Luckily, because I was so involved with Reopen, and Reopen was founded by former state reps, and they're still very involved in the process. And so I felt like they were my coaches, and I kind of got some other coaches, and I may have panicked. I panicked when I first signed up, thinking like, oh my gosh, I have no idea what I'm doing. And then I talked to everybody, and I formulate a plan, and then I got through the primary, and then I panicked again, and then I had to talk to everybody again and reformulate a new plan, get through the general. But basically, I had my 2-year-old, and I put her in a wagon, and I just knocked on doors, and we would kind of do that. Almost every day. I figured even if I only got to 20 houses that day, because that's all that she could kind of get through, that was 20 more people who would vote for me. Yeah. And so, and ultimately from business, I knew that there's hard marketing and soft marketing, and when you don't have a lot of money, it's going to be, the type of marketing that takes a lot of time but isn't very expensive. And well, the most effective way of doing that is to just knock on doors. Yeah. So it doesn't take that much money besides like the literature you hand out. And so I just kept doing that. But ultimately, yes, you do have to campaign and raise money. In New Hampshire, it's much easier, you could say, to win a state race because we have 400 state reps. Yeah. So I only actually represent 3,500 people. So you don't have to raise nearly as much money as you do in other states when you represent a lot more people. So I only raise and spend about $5,000, which it sounds like a lot, but in other states that's like nothing. It's like a drop in the bucket. Yeah. But yeah, a lot of door knocking. I formulated a team. So my dad was out door knocking with me. He's a really good salesman. So he went out and he door knocked for me, and my husband did, and I had a couple friends help me, and that's pretty much how it happened. Yep.
That's pretty awesome. Yeah. So did you find that going around, with your 2-year-old and kind of having that presentation of like, yes, I'm a mom, this is why I'm a real person. Involved. Yeah. Do you feel like that helped you?
Oh, definitely. And if anything, it got the more, like a lot of people just like, oh, okay, hi, thanks, okay, bye. But they would remember me, I think, a little bit more because I had my 2-year-old with me, and they would say hi to her and like, oh, you're so cute. Yeah. So hey, you got to use what you got. I had the kid in the wagon, and all summer we just went around the town, and I think that it definitely helped. What's great about New Hampshire is that we are a citizen legislator, and that's how it looked. I mean, I was just a mom who decided that I wanted to go do this. Yeah.
Yeah. That's pretty awesome. And so when you have, your kids, like, I'm sure that was also a contributing, value as to what made you want to get into politics in the first place. Like, I know you were talking about, the whole COVID thing and how that was kind of, scaring you. But, at least from my perspective, as a mom, you're looking at your kids thinking, okay, whatever future I leave is going to be for them. And so, when you're looking at politics, it's really easy to sit there and say, oh, it's just politics, like, we'll just leave it alone. Whereas if you leave it alone, you're leaving it to people like who might not have the same view of the future as you do. And then that vision is being left for your children. So I guess if you wanted to like kind of elaborate on that and kind of talk more.
I think if I wasn't a mom, I probably wouldn't have gotten so involved in activism. But I just remember looking at her in March and April and foreseeing where this could potentially lead, and thinking, what kind of precedents are we setting for their lives? How are we fundamentally changing our government because of this emergency in ways that will haunt her future forever? And what can I do to not only get us out of this, but also to create safeguards so that this type of authoritarianism can't happen again, especially not every time a disease comes around. And how is it that, because it always throughout history when we give up freedom, we never fully regain it. But how is it that I could work to get more of that back when this is over? Yeah. So, I don't think that I would have worked as hard without her. Yeah, probably wouldn't have done this.
I think that's how a lot of moms are, because I know that there's a lot of different moms who, were really pushed to become more active in, all of these different things and a lot of the different activism groups.
So many more women ran for office this year than have ever run before, and they're almost all mothers. And I think there's like that mama bear instinct that came out this year, and you just want to protect your children, and so you have to do anything it takes to make that happen, even if it means doing something kind of drastic like this.
Yeah. One day your daughter will look back on this and say, "Oh my gosh, look at all this stuff that my mom went through." It took on so much just to help me.
Yes, exactly. Hope so.
So we'll take a quick 10-second break here to talk about Elated Canine. Elated Canine Training and Pet Services, LLC, is here for your family's pets' needs. We work with all ages and breeds. We run day training in our home while you're at work, private lessons at your home, group lessons, and a few other tailor-made services. Please contact Jocelyn at 603-479-7253 or on our website at www.elatedcanine.com for more information. We can't wait to help both you and your pup find the happy, healthy relationship that you're searching for. So we'll go ahead and hop right back into this. And, when you're looking at raising children, I firmly believe that motherhood and politics are like one and the same in a standpoint, because the way that you want to raise your children sometimes can conflict with, certain political ideas or even certain political policies. So I guess from your standpoint, what are some specific political points that concern you as a mom?
Well, education is obviously a big one. How are you going to educate your child? Are you going to have the freedom to educate them in the way that you see fit and the manner that's best for your child and your family? And then I think medical freedom would be a big one. Do you have the ability to have the healthcare and the medical interventions that are best for you and your family and your child, and have the freedom to make those choices yourself? I would say those are probably the two biggest ones that would affect families in particular. And then obviously just a broader picture, but having the ability to make a living in the way that you see fit. That was infringed upon quite a bit this year. People did not actually have the freedom to make a living, which I think should be a fundamental right. So those would be big ones, that I'm focusing a lot of energy on this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And before having children, did you view politics in the same way as you do after having children, or has becoming a mother changed that at all for you?
Well, actually, I did. I was always pretty liberty-minded, although I've gotten there more and more. Probably, yes, since having a child and then throughout this year, really seeing how much the government can infringe upon your day-to-day life. I didn't really realize how much that was possible, and therefore it affecting your family and your children on such a profound level. So I've gotten far more, libertarian, that I just don't think that it's the government's role to start interfering in your life, and especially when it comes to their justifications for all of it. Like, say, this year was, public health. Well, public health policy should be an education to the public, not something that's forced on them, so that you can make the best choices. They can help inform you, but that's pretty much the extent. But yeah, that's so I've just gotten more in the direction that I already was headed. I don't think I made any kind of fundamental changes or anything. I was raised pretty conservatively, but I've just grown more like freedom-minded versus maybe, Republican or conservative.
Yeah. And those are all great points too, because, even like you said, the ability to just earn a living.
Yeah.
Like, that's pretty
fundamental. It should be fundamental, but it's not. All of a sudden, we've decided that some people are essential and some people are non-essential.
Yeah.
But everybody has an essential right to feed their families. So
Right,
yeah.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And we've also seen an attack on small business owners,
Yes.
which has been hugely detrimental. The restaurant, industry is basically swiped out at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, there's very few that are, continuing to survive, and a lot of them have said, if this keeps going on another few months, we're not going to be here.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting how big business was essential and small business was not. I think what we're seeing is something that's been at play for a long time, but we're seeing corporatism on a scale that we've never seen before in the United States anyway, almost to the level of fascism. People always think that fascism is government control, but actually really what it is government controlling business. It's when government and business are so in bed together that they're sort of one and the same. And that's what we're really seeing with big business. Whereas, the poverty levels have gone up quite a bit in this country over the last year, we've also created an unprecedented amount of billionaires. So it's interesting because the left is always the side that's saying, oh, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. That's not really been the case until corporatism in the last few years, especially in this year in particular, where yes, the rich have gotten richer, the big businesses have gotten richer, and the small businesses have been disproportionately affected by government policy. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. Which is interesting because it almost feels like an attack on family.
Yeah.
Because small businesses are run by families.
Yes, yeah.
And so when you're looking at, these different things, and it's like,
yeah.
You have the school systems that are being shut down now and children not being able to properly, be educated, which is, I mean, legally they're entitled to that. That's part of the school system. And a lot of them are struggling now. You're seeing, suicide rates and depression,
I get contacted from constituents every day, it seems like, from a parent upset about remote learning and how it is not working for their child or their family. I mean, I hear from people like last year their kids were straight A students and this year they're failing and it's just not working.
Yeah.
It's not homeschool also. I'd like to point that out to everybody. Yeah. Remote learning is not the same thing as homeschooling at all, not even a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. The whole homeschool community has been like that. Let's make this clear. Yeah. Right? Usually homeschoolers are like out in the world. Right?
Exactly.
Now, when the world
exactly.
is shut down.
Yeah, right.
You can't do it.
Right, exactly. Yeah. and with remote learning, you're still doing what the school is telling you to do. So you don't even have the advantage of homeschooling where you can do what's best for your child and everything. You're still being dictated to, but now you're being dictated to without any support system.
Yeah.
So it's a problem.
It's definitely a problem. So real quick, we're going to do a quick word from our sponsors over at AK Property Services. They're a mom and pop landscaping and hardscaping company. From yard cleanups to 3-season rooms, they can do it all. They're currently servicing the seacoast of New Hampshire, and you can find them over at www.akpropertyservice.com. So now what we're going to do is we'll kind of, go through some of the common issues that tend to affect parents, especially politically. And so, we were kind of just talking about schools. And so I think that that's a great place to start is kind of school choice versus funding the public education systems. There always tends to be, a bit of a conflict there. There are some people who want that money to go more towards like charter schools. Or, I've even heard of some like these homeschool like scholarship programs, whereas there are other people who say, well, we should really just put more money into the public education systems because they're failing because they don't have enough money.
We've created an educational paradigm that's like too big and expensive and complicated to disrupt in a way,
Yeah.
In New Hampshire, we have a couple of school choice bills coming up. The one that politically is probably going to be the winner is a school choice program where you have educational savings accounts, and the money that would be paid out to each child at the state level, which is like $4,000 something per student, will now, if you qualify for this program, would go into a savings account, and you can use that for reimbursement of private school or homeschool or whatever you want in that regard, whichever private school is participating. Now, I have mixed feelings on this. I love the idea of school choice. I mean, that, you should be able to do whatever is best for your children. But fundamentally, I believe more in educational freedom, that you have the freedom to send your child to any private school that you want. You have the freedom to home educate your child in any way that you want. My concern with school choice is that they claim that they're giving you your money back to be able to use. But once that money has left your hands, it is no longer your money. It's really, it all went into a common pot, okay? A common government pot. And now they're going to dole it back out to you. There are always strings attached. Now, this is a good bill. This is the best bill I've ever seen in this regard, in that they've tried to create a lot of safeguards from too many strings being attached. But I think once you create that type of structure, you are opening yourself up to down the line, maybe you get a bad legislator in there, and now they decide they're going to add strings to that. And that mechanism and that government structure has now been created that they can do that. So let's say, private school down the street that you think, well, I'm going to use this money to go send them. Well, right now, you can pretty much do that, and they're not going to control anything about that school. But my fear with these types of accounts is that down the line, you get a legislator in there and say, well, okay, but if you're going to be a school that takes that money, you have to do X, Y, Z, A, B. Now, that school is probably going to say, okay, because the reality is they're getting more students now and therefore more money from these education savings accounts. But now your private school is being controlled by the government. And this is a good bill, and it is trying to create safeguards to that. I'm just not sure there can be enough, and I worry about that mechanism already now being created. So that's sort of the school choice versus educational freedom. I think they can be the same thing, but they maybe aren't. I think it's a slippery slope. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I know, so here in New Hampshire, the schools, they're funded by property taxes, right? Some different, yes, a lot of it's property taxes. Some of it does come from state accounts, state monies rather, not just property taxes. So it's about $15,000 per student is what we spend in New Hampshire, and that is exactly average with the national average, actually. That seems like an astronomical amount of money, actually. But only like 4,000 something comes from state funds, and that's what would go into this educational savings account. Pretty much the rest of it is coming from property taxes. So the other thing that I worry about with this, I've looked at the financial statements, and they've done, a lot of modeling, financial modeling, and it looks like from the financial modeling that as there are less people enrolled in public school, right? Well, the schools will have to cut back down on their expenses, and therefore they'll become less expensive, and therefore it should use up less property taxes, right? Like hypothetically, that's how it should work. Except my concern is that nothing like that ever works that way with government. Government never shrinks, it always grows, and public schools have union contracts, and they tend to be multi-year union contracts, and so I do worry that for especially a few years it may be a lot of double expenses and end up costing the taxpayers more in the long run. I know in Nashua now they're claiming it's mismanaged funds, but again, that's what the government does, they mismanage funds. But in Nashua, because of remote learning, they've had a massive student population decrease, actually, and their property taxes went up this year to make up for the difference in the schools. So it didn't actually work out that way. So I'm a little bit concerned. That's not a popular opinion amongst the Liberty folks, by the way. This isn't popular. It's just how I feel. It's something that I'm wrapping my head around because it's going to come to vote soon. So.
Well, and I totally get that because, like you said, it's like logically you would think that the more people pull their kids,
it should be that way.
That the money, won't be happening, and that when they redo their budget, it's going to be significantly less.
Right.
But I have heard too, like they're saying that, the remote learning is actually more expensive because they have to provide laptops and like all these different services that they didn't have to do before.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense.
And so I'm kind of like, well...
Government is stupid. Like, I just want to put that out to everybody. Government is not efficient. No matter what you try to say, it will never be efficient. Government is this big, clunky, complicated, layered thing, and you can't expect it to act in an efficient manner because it's just not. It's never going to. So you have to just expect that it won't. And move forward in that manner.
Right. Yeah. And I definitely see where you're coming from looking at that, because it's like, that was something I wouldn't have considered, is that, once you have that government entity in place, that they can just add strings later. And then what you end up with is private schools, quote unquote, that really aren't private schools, because now they're being, manipulated by the government to do what they want to do.
Yeah, this is my distrust of government coming out. And I just think everyone should be inherently distrustful of their government.
Well, and, I will say there were a lot of things that people were saying back, last year that I sat there and said, you guys, like,
Crazy.
I mean, I don't believe, I don't really trust the government all that much either, but, like, that's so bizarre. Like, how would you get to that point where now everything that they've predicted has basically come true? I'm kind of like, okay, well, I'm there with you now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, me too. I've come a long way this year also. Yeah.
And then another thing that's been a huge issue, I know, within the past several years, and I think now with COVID, it's going to be an issue again, is really a lot of different medical bills. And one of the ones that really comes up is like forced vaccinations for school attendance. And so in the past, we've seen, places like, California and New York, and I think even Maine at one point, Connecticut, where they went ahead and pulled like religious exemptions and basically and made it harder to get medical exemptions, for school attendance. So, I know that there's a lot of parents right now that maybe they did fully vaccinate their children. It's not like they're anti-vaxxers or anything. Sure. But now with the COVID vaccine coming out, and it's not yet approved for children, but the concern is that once it is that going to be mandated? And who would feel comfortable? You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of parents who sat there and said, well, I've vaccinated my kids so far, but now I'm not too sure about the COVID one.
Yeah. So a couple of things. First of all, as of right now, it is only FDA approved for emergency experimental use, so it can't be mandated by anybody for anything. And I just want to put that out there. If your employer is saying that they want to mandate that you get this vaccine, they actually cannot do that until it gets full FDA approval. So just want to point that out. And I will also say that we're not going to have this be an issue until a little bit further down the line, so we have a little bit more time to put work in, because you have to have enough doses to be able to mandate it for anybody. Let's talk about New Hampshire. So your legislators do know that this is coming down the line, and we have been working to put in a lot of medical freedom bills. We have a couple. We have one in particular that's a really great one it's a Medical Freedom Act. They're basically like adding on that, this just basic concept that you have the right to have any medical intervention or not have any medical intervention that you want, and that the government can't take anything away from you. The government, this is a distinction. The government can't take anything away from you as far as like services like school or your driver's license or anything like that because you did not get a vaccine. Now, on the other side of that, there's another bill being put in that would amend civil rights statutes. So right now, there are protected classes in a civil rights statute, like race, religion, gender, sexual identity, whatever, all of that sort of stuff. They're adding on to it to include vaccination status and use of a medical device. So that would protect you as an employee. Like, let's say your employer wants you to get mandated a vaccine, that would protect you from that. It would make it so that a business can't force you to be vaccinated to be a customer, anything like that. So moving down the line, we're gonna give it a shot this year. We'll see. Yeah. Now, in the state of New Hampshire, the one thing that I find very concerning that most people don't know about is that to add a vaccine to the mandated school schedule, in most states it requires a vote of the legislator. But in New Hampshire, the commissioner of DHHS can do it on their own without any oversight. So tomorrow, Laurie Shibanek can wake up and say, all right, that's it. We're going to mandate the COVID vaccine for children to go to school. That can literally happen right now.
Even though it's not FDA approved.
Okay, maybe a twinkle that gets FDA approved for children. That's true.
Yeah.
But there won't be any vote to make that happen. So we do... I think I'm going to work on that for next year. I'm not worried about it this calendar year because there won't be enough doses. And then by the time it actually gets FDA approved for children, it's not going to be part of the school schedule. in 2021.
Yeah.
2022, I think I might put in something to change that, because it should be like most states where it's a vote of the legislator to add to the children's vaccine schedule. And I will also say in New Hampshire, there are no current moves to, take away religious exemptions or anything like that. So, however, do you want me to go into Emergency Order 76, which is like my pet project?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So emergency orders, again, we're living in a one-man rule situation here. By the stroke of a pen, our governor can decide to do anything he wants to do. And so right now, Emergency Order 76 basically made tracking of vaccines, of the COVID vaccine, mandatory in the Vaccine Registry. He also, quote, accidentally yet has yet to correct, suspended part of the statute that removes religious exemptions for parents sending their children to school in regards to the COVID vaccine. Now, his point is like, well, but there is no requirement for children to go to school with a COVID vaccine, so it doesn't matter. But the reality is that, again, tomorrow DHHS commissioner could wake up and say, well, there is now. And then he has now removed the religious exemptions for that. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. Really hoping he makes that correction soon. I don't like that being like out in the world. And then the other thing is that there is no vaccine registry. So he's asking that we track certain data points, claiming that it's a CDC requirement that we do this. But the reality is we don't have a registry. We've been trying to build it for years. We keep throwing millions of dollars at it. It's not live. It's not active. So right now we have this order that does nothing. But tomorrow that registry may go live. And then we start tracking vaccination events, meaning those who decline the vaccine as well as those who accept the vaccine with identifiable data about all of those people. That is not being required by the CDC. The only thing that's being required by the CDC to receive the COVID vaccine is tracking of unidentifiable data of only those who receive the vaccine. And we are already doing that through the Vaccine Administration Management System, which is a CDC-created system. And that's how we're actually currently receiving the CDC vaccine. So the whole thing is one lie.
Smokescreen.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the end game is here. I actually don't think it's the governor at all. I think there's some funny games being played by DHHS.
Yeah.
So that's where we are. That's my whole vaccine story about the state of New Hampshire.
Yeah.
That's a lot of information, maybe. I don't know.
No, well, it's good to know, though, because this is a concern of a lot of parents.
Yeah.
And I think that this kind of a situation is exactly why a lot of moms went into politics.
Yep.
Because this is something that they were afraid of happening, and now it's happening.
Exactly. And we're talking about potentially mandating a vaccine for children who not only are at absolutely no risk of dying of COVID. Nobody under the age of 20, I believe, in the state of New Hampshire has died of COVID, not a single person. Children are not at risk. I don't care how safe the vaccine is, they will always be at more risk of having an adverse reaction to that vaccine, even if it was a super safe vaccine and like a tried and true one that's been around for decades, than they would of dying or having an adverse reaction to COVID. And COVID is practically the first, disease that's come around where children are not a vector of transmission. So I'm not sure why we would talk about mandating a COVID vaccine for children, but I certainly see that coming down the line as well.
Yeah. And also, too, I mean, a lot of the data that we've been looking at when it comes to some of the vaccines, it's like sometimes, not necessarily the vaccine, but the disease, COVID, where it's like, it's always so flippy-floppy with what kind of precautions that they're talking about. And so, to me, that's a huge concern, too, because when you're looking at, mandating a vaccine for a child, it's like, okay, well, if you've been flippy-floppy for the last, whole year, like,
there is no public health confidence anymore. Nobody has, if you want to talk about, like, from a real mainstream perspective, I'm not putting my tinfoil hat on or anything. The reality is that public health officials have been repeatedly wrong about COVID all year long.
Yeah.
And I would say one of the biggest bits of damage they did was completely decimating the relationship between the public and public health officials. Because there is no confidence anymore from most of the population.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Which is, I mean, really concerning.
It is, because it's supposed to be the job of public health officials, not that they require you to do things, but that you have a general respect between the public and public health officials where you can, they can educate and help identify risks so that you, as a member of the public, can make best decisions for yourself and your family.
Yeah.
And that trust doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, that's just not how they're doing it anymore
No.
at all. So we were kind of talking about it a little bit with some of the religious exemptions and things like that. So another big, thing that tends to affect parents is religious rights.
Yes.
And I think this year we've also seen a lot of those kind of, go in the toilet.
Yep.
Especially where we're talking can't assemble for churches anymore.
Right.
There's been a number of different, really attacks on religion as well.
Yeah. So, that being such a First Amendment enumerated right, because it's enumerated, it should have been easier to defend, but yet we shut down, houses of worship for a while. Then we had severe capacity limitations on them, what you were allowed and not allowed to do within those houses of worship. And I'm not like a super religious person myself, but when I looked back at them shutting down houses of worship back in March, I immediately thought, why is it that people's mental and spiritual health are not as important as the rest of this? For a lot of people, religion is an incredibly important part of their lives and necessary for their mental health, which will affect their physical health. And if we're talking like we're moving into a pandemic, why are we I saw this mental health crisis that we are now living in. And we have a severe mental health crisis in this country. And I can't help but think, because we just shut down houses of worship and then made them into these sort of weird, sterile, bizarreness that they're sort of in right now. Now, I will say right now in the state of New Hampshire, there are no restrictions on houses of worship at the moment.
That's a good that's a positive turn of events.
Yes. There was maybe a lawsuit that didn't actually go all the way through, but I guess it must have been a very convincing lawsuit because he changed that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and again, though, like you said, that's like a First Amendment, right. So that's something that I think most people never in a million years thought that they'd try to infringe on.
Exactly.
Because we're protected. It's in the Constitution, but yet they did it anyway.
I was really surprised that he did that because Governor Sununu was very careful at not leaving any holes the way that other governors did during the shutdown. Which is why we haven't been able to get lawsuits to stick, honestly, because he was very careful. He is a very good attorney general who really closed all the gaps. For instance, even during the shutdown, gun stores remained open in New Hampshire. And that was, again, because it's an enumerated right. We have an enumerated Second Amendment right, and he felt that would be a very clear Second Amendment lawsuit if he shut down gun stores. And that was a very clear Second Amendment lawsuit in most states in the country, actually, and they did get them reopened. Well, he never shut them down to begin with, so he was very good, and that was very tricky, but it was good.
Yeah.
But I'm surprised then that the houses of worship thing happened, and I was very disappointed in religious leaders in the state that they didn't stick up for themselves during that more. The religious communities were very quiet on this issue until more recently, and that's how all the restrictions ended. So sometimes you have to fight back a little bit.
Yeah. And we're definitely finding that more, increasingly so. It's, these things that are happening, especially I know with the, was Emergency Order 76 that you were talking about.
Yep.
I know when that went through, there was a huge explosion in activity of activism.
Yeah.
Because people realize you're now suspending law, which I'm pretty sure not legally able to do.
Part 1, Article 29 of the New Hampshire State Constitution states that only the legislator may suspend law. So yes, I contend that the governor has had very clear constitutional violations. He has violated freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, and then Part 1, Article 29, which is what I just said. Part 1, Article 2B, which is in New Hampshire, we actually have the right to privacy from government intrusion. And if you are requiring that people's vaccine status must be tracked by the government, that's a violation of privacy. And then I also contend that he has violated Part 1 Article 37 of the New Hampshire State Constitution, which says that that's our separation of powers clause of our Constitution. The legislator right now doesn't really have any power when he can legislate from the executive branch as is happening currently.
Yeah.
So, but I want to point this out to your audience because I really want to make billboards that say this because nobody knows this. The first lawsuit back in March, this was Binford versus Sununu. You can all go look it up. The Attorney General argued, and he did not have to argue this. It wasn't a great lawsuit. He could have won with his hands tied behind his back, but he chose to argue that during a state of emergency, our state of emergency laws are so broad in the authority that they give the governor that they give him the ability to suspend the Constitution and to suspend civil liberties. And that is correct. As of right now, the governor could do anything that he wants. We have given our governor the most amount of authority practically of any governor in the country. He could do anything that he wants as long as he can give a, quote, reason. It doesn't matter what it is.
And that's pretty much what America was like trying to escape.
That's why we have our Constitution. Constitutions
Right.
are not supposed to be suspended in times of emergency, but they have been. So
Yeah.
a big part of my mission with running for office is to change our state of emergency laws. The governor is also aware that they need to be changed. He is okay with that. They do need to be changed. The Constitution cannot be suspended in times of crisis. Your civil liberties cannot be suspended during times of crisis, and there needs to be legislative oversight. We understood that one-man rule doesn't work. That's why we have a republic, okay?
Yeah.
And yet, we have gotten rid of that during this emergency. So we need to restore our constitutional republic.
Yes. Absolutely. And I mean, there's lots of different bills that I know you guys are working on.
There's like
this
40.
year. Yeah. To try to help pull all of that in and to try to help, I guess, like you said, just make sure this stuff doesn't happen again in the future.
Yes.
Which is huge.
Yeah, this is going to be the biggest project of this year is to completely reform our state of emergency laws so that when we have lots of different ideas, like I said, there's like 40 bills being put in, all of which have different ideas. I have my own version that went in.
Yeah.
Like everyone's got their own version with their own ideas of how to create checks and balances during a state of emergency. But we'll all work together and we will come up with something that we will move forward with, but it probably will not go into effect until 2022. So it will not affect this emergency.
Yeah. Well, and so I guess one of the big hurdles I'm sure you guys are facing. So while I've seen lots of different moms and, families, being negatively affected by this and that, really want to fight back against, I know there are thousands of, New Hampshire families that are really trying to get into the activism to stop all of this. But at the same time and in the same token, Sununu has like his highest popularity rating, which
I didn't understand that. I don't know anybody who approves of his handling of COVID, so I don't know who these people are.
Yeah.
I don't know anybody who approves of his handling of COVID. They all either disapprove or because they want less, or they're on the other side and they disapprove because they want him to do more. I don't know who these people are who approve it. I do know that a lot of people voted for him because they could look around the country and see that all the Democrat governors were worse.
Yeah.
And the reality is where we are right now is that I would say we're in the best position in regards to COVID, restrictions or whatever in the country, except maybe sans South Dakota and Florida,
Yeah.
But other than that, we're doing really, really well. And I will say that I believe, because he pretty much had an equal response, to everybody else in the spring. I think the reason why we never re-shut down again, why he keeps loosening the rein, is because we have put a lot of pressure on him. And I'm very proud of everyone here that we have put the pressure on. Our activism movements have been effective and effective in changing the landscape of the legislator quite a bit. I think the reality is that he knows that he faces a lot more pushback from his now Republican-controlled legislator than he did last year with his Democratic-controlled legislator.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And it's like I said, I find it so fascinating that there's, so many people that are being so negatively affected by the whole shutdown. And, and I think it did kind of grow on it. Like, I think, around when a lot of the polls were being taken for popularity in terms of,
Yes.
the vote, now you're seeing a lot more people that are really starting to say, okay,
enough is enough.
Yeah, enough is enough. Like, how much longer do we have to do
Right.
this? And especially going into the winter months. I mean, here in New Hampshire specifically, the winter months can be very challenging, especially for a lot of small businesses or for a lot of families, because now you're kind of, these are the months that most people are kind of stuck at home a little bit. If you're not, if you're not into winter sports, you're pretty much inside.
Yep.
And there's different businesses that are very seasonal, and so right now is their slow time. And I think a lot of people are now seeing the effects of not being able to do all those things and not being able to have a successful summer and spring. That now they're really struggling getting through the winter.
Yeah, I think the tides are going to be turning very soon, and I think. Like I said, I'm proud of all the work that we've done. Governor Sununu, to be completely fair, has shown a tremendous amount of restraint considering the amount of unlimited authority that the legislator did give him in these laws. And I think he's starting to see that there needs to be an exit strategy, and we are starting to work towards that exit strategy.
Yeah. And like you said, I think it's probably a lot easier for him to work towards that exit strategy now that he's in a, because he's a Republican. Yep. So being in a Republican-dominated, House, I'm sure that's a lot easier for him as well.
The Democrats abdicated their role last year. They were quite willing to let him just kind of handle it all. And they ran on a platform of COVID authoritarianism. So, the Republicans didn't, and he knows that, so we're starting to work together towards a resolution here, because to quote Trump, the disease can't be worse than the cure, and I think we realized that here, and I think he actually always did, which is why he never quite got as bad as everybody else or as severe, and why he did loosen the reins even before his Republican-controlled legislature. But
Yeah. So, when we're looking at some of these bills that are being, proposed, even some things that might not necessarily have to do with COVID, but like, if you're looking at, so I know a lot of moms right now, one of the biggest things is, looking at if you get pregnant, right? There's this whole big influx of COVID babies right now. And, which, I guess, some of us are affected even if we didn't really quarantine, but, it's like, a lot of moms are getting to the point where it's like, I'm pregnant and this is so exciting, but oh crap, I don't want to go into a hospital right now because of the way that they're doing these. And so some of them are doing like, the masks with labor. Some of them are doing where even if the father was to leave the hospital, he can't come back. Yeah. Things like that. And
it's so crazy.
It's like I remember, with my daughter who's now 2, it was like, we were in the hospital and, we went in and my husband was able to come and go freely, which was really nice because he could go out and get himself some lunch and go back to the apartment and pick up some stuff for me. And, it was really nice. And I could not imagine being in a situation where it's like, once we leave, we don't leave until, like, we can't come out of the hospital until we're done. Like,
it's so crazy. And the laboring with a mask thing is just shocking to me.
Yeah.
I mean, and even just being pregnant and wearing a mask, there's a reason why OSHA doesn't let pregnant workers wear masks, why reasonable accommodations have to be made for them, because we have decades worth of data to show that masking pregnant women causes preterm labor and birth defects. Why are we doing this? But our reaction to this is just so monumentally out of control. But I'm glad that people have the option to have the birth that they, or at least options for a better birth, i.e. being in a birthing center or being home. But as far as the actual hospitals, I think those are individual policies, right? Those are.
I think so.
Yeah, because each one, they are private companies, and each hospital seems to have a different policy. Because I have heard of some of the hospitals here in New Hampshire changing their policy recently, whereas like the father can go in and out now. So, unfortunately, there's not a lot that we can do about that, but. Hopefully some sanity returns. Soon.
And so I know, like,
do you have to get a COVID test?
I don't even know, actually. If you were to go into the hospital, do you need a COVID test?
Probably.
I don't know. And I think it would depend too, like how much of an emergency is it? Like,
yeah.
You know what I mean? Because
right, if you're like showing up and you like need a C-section at that moment, otherwise I'm pretty sure they're not going to shove it test up your nose.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or like, you know, you go in and like your baby's like half out.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Oh, wow. But I had like an induced labor, so I can only imagine like in today's world, I probably would have had to have a COVID test and all that kind of.
Yeah. Oof. Yeah, I don't know. I just know, like, so obviously I'm 38 weeks pregnant right now. And in the beginning when we went in to go, like, do, like, this 7 or 8 week ultrasound just to, like, you know, you go in and you test to see the heartbeat and all that stuff. But, you know, my husband wasn't allowed in. Like, at the time. He was, like, that was so the policy. Yeah. I had to go in, and I had to wear a mask. Which, you know, again, you're pregnant.
What I was saying,
you know, and I had to wear a mask. They didn't care, and they basically said there's no visitors allowed, so my husband's not allowed in because he's not technically a patient.
Right.
Even, you know, and I mean, I know he's not technically a patient, but, like, he did help create it.
Right.
So, like, I don't see how that,
Lord.
You know, I know. But those are the kinds of things that even now, like, you know, when it comes to ultrasounds and, you know, all those different various things that,
I feel bad for all the you pregnant people. Yeah. I cannot imagine having a baby in the middle of this. Yeah. I was such like a mental nutcase that if I then had the stress of all of this on top of that, whew, can't imagine.
Yeah, well, so again, one of the things, so we're planning on doing a home birth, which luckily in the state of New Hampshire, they're very good about home births. I mean, you know, it's a pretty free state in that sense, as long as, like, you're low risk and, you know, there's certain things where you have to go into the hospital for, but, you know, luckily we're not in that category. And so, you know, we're doing a home birth, which is great, but it was kind of a similar thing. I talked to my midwife and I said, hey, if like the only way we're stepping foot in a hospital is like immediate emergency, medical emergency, because the policies are just so bizarre to me.
Yeah.
So I mean, from a political standpoint, is there any sort of, I mean, the home birth laws in New Hampshire are already pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, in New Hampshire, generally speaking, we are the live free or die state. And so, yeah, compared to most states about a lot of those things, the point is that we don't have restrictions.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. This is about personal responsibility. If these are risks that you feel like you want to take, that's your choice.
Yeah. And another thing that kind of comes up when you talk about health as well, and especially here, like, you know, in the pandemic era, it's, you know, the look at, like, different healthcare options. So I know that's a little different state to state in terms of what kind of healthcare options are available. And I do know, I mean, you know, we just have Biden just, you know, took office as president, and I know he's planning on changing some of those things. But when you look at, like, universal health care versus private health care insurances and, you know, Medicaid and Medicare, is there any sort of, you know, bills or anything that's going through politically that might change some of that? Just because now we're in a pandemic. I do know, I think is it Medicare? Not the one that's for older people, but the one that's
Medicare would be for older people. So
Medicaid. It's Medicaid. Yep. I do know Medicaid went ahead and redid, like, all of their income requirements. So because there were so many people that were losing jobs that then had to apply to Medicaid, they ended up lowering the income requirement. And so basically now you have to be, like, dirt poor to qualify. So, you know, I know that there have been some changes like that because of COVID, because so many people...
On the state level, I don't know of anything, but I will just say my general opinion on our entire healthcare system is that the further down the rabbit hole of socialized medicine that we've fallen, the more expensive and less efficient it's become. So I don't see why we need to keep moving down that path when it just keeps getting worse.
Yeah.
I mean, medical care, people also confuse the terms, you know, medical care with insurance. You know, they actually are two separate things.
Yeah.
But the cost of medical care used to be affordable before everyone had insurance. And then unions added, I mean, this is sort of the history of health insurance, but, like, unions added health insurance as a benefit to, you know, get more people on board.
Yeah.
And then it just became it kind of spiraled out of control from there. And then when it became that pretty much everybody had it, then, you know, things got more and more expensive. And then certainly Obamacare, making it so that everyone was required to have health insurance made it more expensive. Everything has gotten more expensive as we have moved further and further away from the concept of I'm sick, I pay X amount of dollars for you to like give me an antibiotic. Do you know what I mean? Like it has gotten so much more expensive and out of control. I don't think I have the answers, honestly, to our healthcare system issues and woes, other than to say the path that we keep moving down isn't working. Yeah. It keeps making it worse. Yeah. So it seems like we should reverse course.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know a lot of moms are, kind of struggling with that because you have a family and, it is good to have some level of an insurance in case something was to happen.
Yeah. Because the cost of, like your kid falling and breaking their arm is so astronomically expensive now that now it's like you have to have insurance to be able to cover it. Yeah. It didn't used to be like that, though. It used to be that you could actually, like the average person who's working, like, even a low-end job could afford to just pay for that out of pocket. Now we can't.
Yeah. 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 Is there anything, and I know you said you don't really have the answers to that, but is there anything that can be done on a state level to kind of mitigate that, or is that more
This is not like,
issue?
I think it's because the federal government has become so deeply involved, it's as I said, everything with government is too big, too complicated, too twisted, too many layers to figure out, I don't know. And that's out of my wheelhouse, I'm afraid.
That's okay. And I know one of the other topics of conversation that usually comes up when it comes to politics and, families is, maternity leave and, Family Medical Leave Act, which also applies to, fathers as well, to be able to take time off. And there's always been a little bit of a debate as to whether or not that should be paid or unpaid and how, I guess the debate is always, should a business have to pay for somebody to have a child? Which, they're really not like paying the medical bills, but to take that time off. Right. Versus, having them be more responsible for their own time off. Right. It's a tough issue because, like, as a mom, I know how important that time off is with your child. But then from the freedom perspective, it's like, well, should a business really have to pay that end either? So I was wondering if you had any sort of...
Yeah, I do have thoughts on that. So, for instance, my husband, he works for a tech company. He got, when we had our daughter, I think he got 12 weeks off. That is not government mandated, right? The government doesn't say that fathers have to be able to get this. That is market driven. Okay. The market has driven a lot of what has ended up happening with family leave time, because if you want to get good employees, you have to have good benefits. And that's literally just what's happened naturally. So no government, I don't think it's the government's role to come in and say X, Y, Z must happen. I think that consumerism and free markets drive that decision making, which is how my husband got 12 weeks off. I know that in New Hampshire we have a optional family paid leave program for state employees that's going to be coming up this year. Basically that you can choose to pay into a program to, have time off. I don't really understand why those things exist, and here's why. So, you put in X amount of dollars into this program, you have a kid, now you get some days off, whatever. Why couldn't you have just put that in a savings account? Yeah. Instead of putting it into a pool, now it's a pool of money that has administrative costs. People never understand that when you start giving the government money to do things, and so that you can get something back for it, it's always you've put in X and so-and-so's put in Y, so you think it's going to be X and Y put together that's going to be divided out into two equal parts again. No. It's X and Y minus, C, and C is the administrative costs. Yeah. There's always government costs to everything. So if you would have just taken that exact same money that you chose to put into this optional family leave and just put it into a savings account, you're going to end up with more money than you would have if you put it into this program. Yeah. So I don't understand programs like that unless they can show me like that this makes a little bit more sense than what I'm thinking it does right now. I don't think I'm going to vote for it. But that's sort of how I feel. So I think that markets drive things like employee benefits. And right now, a hot button issue is paid family leave time. And so it's becoming more and more and more common for jobs to just choose to give their employees that. I don't personally know anybody who's ever had a job where they got no time off to have a baby, like at all.
Yeah.
They at least get some type of, paid or unpaid time off. Usually it's paid. I don't think I know anybody except for maybe like a minimum wage employee who got that. But typically I think that markets drive that, and then these programs don't really make a lot of sense to me when you're going to end up subtracting money from that you could have put aside yourself.
Yeah. Well, I know, so before my daughter was born, I was working as well. So I worked full-time position, 40 hours a week. And so I did have some benefits as well. And my husband was, obviously working a full-time position as well. And both of them, like, you get the Family Medical Leave Act, right? Which is basically the requirement that they have to at least give, and I think it's up to 12 weeks. But it doesn't
have to be paid.
But it doesn't have to be paid.
I think it's 6, right? But it doesn't have to be paid.
Yeah. And so they basically say, well, like, at least for both of our companies, said you can use any paid time off that you've accrued or any sick time, during that time that you're taking off.
Right.
But, if you don't have any of that, you're kind of shit out of luck.
Right.
So I guess, I know you said that there's a lot of companies that are just choosing to pay their employees for some sort of a maternity or paternity leave, which is great, I think.
It didn't used to be the case, but again, consumerism has driven that. My husband got 12 paid weeks off.
Yeah, that's awesome.
He didn't take it out. He's like a salesman, and so he has quotas, and like we make a lot of money off of his sales, so commission. So he took it kind of. I don't think he ended up taking out 12 weeks period, and he kind of took it in chunks throughout the year so he could sell. But that's great, and that didn't exist so many years ago because consumerism wasn't driving. The markets weren't driving that, but now they are. And that's not because the government required them to do that. I think there's a difference between. I have no problem with the companies paying for their employees to have time off. I have a problem with the government requiring that they do that. The money comes from somewhere.
No, and I agree, and especially where you're talking about, it's like, anytime you give money to the government, it's just being pooled somewhere. And that pool, like you said, it has administrative costs. There's all sorts of other things that go along with it.
Right.
And who knows what kind of strings are attached to it.
And then there's always going to be strings attached when they hand it back to you. As opposed to if you just kept it yourself to begin with.
Yeah, that's why I was going to say a lot of financial advisors, and, I'm not a financial advisor by any stretch of the imagination, but a lot of them will say, like, especially when it comes to taxes, it's like, don't, there's a lot of people out there who sit there and file, like, as much tax as possible, so that way you get the return at the end of the year. And it's like, they'll always tell you, they're like, don't do that. Like,
try to break
even, and any extra money that you would have been doing that, just put away and invest.
Exactly.
Because that's what the government's doing with it, and they're just keeping the
profits. People use the government as like a no interest savings account. I was trying to break even.
Which, that would be nice if government worked like that, sort of, but they're just, they don't do that. They have their own plan.
Totally.
Is there anything else that you were thinking of in terms of, the political landscape and how it might affect mothers and children? And I know, there's a lot of that's going on right now with COVID, but it doesn't necessarily have to be, COVID related.
We kind of got through a lot of it with like education and healthcare. I think those are pretty much the biggest ones that usually affect children more directly. And then there's just generally the idea of parents' rights. Do you have the right to decide what's best for your child versus the government deciding what's best for your child? And I think in New Hampshire, we do very well as far as allowing parents to have those rights, but that's not necessarily the case in other places. Parents don't necessarily have the right to decide what's best for their child.
Yeah. So, I mean, we do live in New Hampshire, which is the live free or die state, and it definitely has a lot of benefits there.
Yes, it does.
You get to raise your children how you want, which is very nice. And as long as there's no crackdowns on any of that, then I think we should be good. I know some people were concerned about some of the homeschooling laws getting a little bit stricter, with the whole remote learning, because there were so many children that got pulled out of the school district and went homeschooling, that there was a little bit of a concern that they might try to bring in some of the homeschooling laws. Have you seen anything like that?
No, I haven't seen any bills that have to do with homeschooling laws. As far as I know, it is all still the same. We have pretty lenient laws. You just like let the school like know that you intend to homeschool at the beginning of the year, and then you have to do some type of review at the end of the year, and you have lots of choices for what can be the case. But otherwise, we don't have specific requirements as far as what or how or when you teach whatever.
Yeah. That's always I love the homeschool laws here.
Yes.
It's so free. Like
Yes.
you can make any curriculum you want, and
There are freer. There are some states that literally have nothing.
yeah. Yeah.
So just saying, it does exist. But no, we have great homeschool laws. It's been a long time since they attempted to do anything to infringe upon homeschooling rights, and that's not going to happen with this current legislator.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think what we're going to do now is we're going to do something real quick with Kaja Weglars, and then we're going to kind of tie everything up here.
Okay.
So there's a clinical hypnotherapist, Kaja Weglars, and she offers personalized hypnotherapy programs designed specifically for you with your unique goals in mind. Release low vibration emotions from the past, overcome childhood traumas, and create a life you love. Become a better mom, wife, and individual, and find your inner bliss through true self-love. Leave the past behind, overcome negative self-talk and unwanted habits, and become empowered. You can reach her at www.facebook.com/Kaja Weglars Hypnotherapy, and that's spelled KASIAWEGLARZ Hypnotherapy, or call 603-254-6716. So that's the end of our show here today. I did also want to point out a couple things. Mothers Illuminated does have a VIP group on Facebook where you can access extra content with a Q&A question or section of each video. You can be a part of a mother's mentorship program through Facebook, early access to all shows, a promo code for free shipping from our merchandise website. You'll also be notified a week prior to each show being filmed so that you can contribute questions that may be picked for the Q&A segment. It's a great program, only for $8 monthly from Patreon. So you can sign up for that monthly membership at patreon.com/mothersilluminated. This show can also be found on podcast.mothersilluminated.com, as well as our YouTube channel at Mothers Illuminated. And if you're interested in being part of the show, reach out to us at mothersilluminated@gmail.com. You can also find related merchandise at teespring.com, which is teespring.com/stores/mothers-illuminated. So, Melissa, it's been great having you here.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thank you for stopping by.